So far in this presentation, we've learned about artificial moral agents and a little bit about their history, some of the different types of implementations, some different ethical values that they may hold, and going forward we're going to be talking about the current state of the field as well as some future trends. But before we go any further, we're going to look at another example of an ethical dilemma and how that these AMAs can actually be quite beneficial when they use these different types of ethics. So we're going to be talking about the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. Now, this was a tragedy that happened in the North Atlantic when the ship was making its maiden voyage from Europe over to America. And the ship was believed to be unsinkable, so the designers did not put enough lifeboats on it for all the passengers. And when it struck an iceberg and it started to sink, the crewmen had to follow orders to load only the women and children first onto the lifeboats. Now, on the deck of the boat, it was quite chaotic, and some of the sailors didn't quite understand the captain's orders. So they would load the nearby women and children, and then when the boat was full, they'd actually just lower it, not even filling up the boat completely. And sometimes the sailors didn't even know how to properly lower these boats. There were 20 boats total on the Titanic, and 2 of them were improperly lowered, and they weren't even able to be used. So I created a program that's going to take the exact demographics of the passengers on the ship, the same amount of men, women, and children, as well as the same amount of first class, second class, and third class passengers, and the same amount of crew. And I'm going to use an AMA that uses utilitarian ethics, as well as the deontological ethics that we've talked about. And we're going to see if that these 2 different artificial moral agents can yield more ethical results than what actually happened in the Titanic. So we're going to go over here and we're going to start the program. And right away here, you can see here in result set 1 that this is the real results of what happened in the Titanic. There was 2,224 passengers on board, we can see right here. And we can see that there were 710 total survivors, and that had a passenger survival ratio of only 32%. And if we look here, we can see that there was 51% of the children saved, 74% of the women, and only 20% of the men. So this wasn't a very fair breakdown of who got to live and die. And this was even seen here if we look at the classes. First class had 62%, goes down to 41% in second class, then 25% in third class, and only 23% of the crew survived. So we can see that this wasn't a very fair breakdown or ethical of who got to live or die. So we're going to look at first the utilitarian AMA and see what it would have done in this situation. So it took the same constraints as what actually happened, and it was able to save 1,371 passengers for a overall passenger survival ratio of 62%. This is almost double the actual results of what happened to that Titanic. And you can see here that it's negative 191 passengers, but that's because this AMA looked at the amount of spots that each lifeboat could hold, which was around 59 passengers, and it took the amount of weight that each of these boats could hold. So this AMA wanted to save the most possible lives, so it wanted to fit the most amount of people in the boats as possible. So it only wanted to load the lightest passengers. So it looked at each passenger's weight. It sorted the whole passenger list by weight, and it loaded the lightest first, then the second lightest. And so a majority of these were children, and then a lot of women, and then lastly males. As you can see here in the breakdown by children, 100% lived. Almost all of the women survived, and half of the men survived. And we can see right here that there was way more men on board than women. So this is actually a lot better distribution, even though almost 100% of women survived and only half the men survived. There was almost 900 men saved and 400 women saved. So, and if we look at the class breakdown here, we can see that it's right around 60 to 70% saved in first class, second class, third class, the crew. So it's a much more fair spread compared to the first results. And then last we can look at the deontological AMA and see its results. And now this followed a specific rule, and that rule was it first loaded all the children, and then once all the children were on board, it loaded the females and the males in a first come, first serve fashion. So we can see that it saved 1,244 people for a survival ratio of 56%, and it saved about half of the women and half of the men and all of the children. And again, just like the utilitarian AMA, it had a very pretty even split between the different classes. So comparing this 56% survival ratio and the 62% of the utilitarian to the original 32% of the actual results of what happened to the Titanic, we can see that the utilitarian AMA and the deontological AMA actually can provide better results than what actually happened. And this shows that these AMAs can make good decisions in tough ethical dilemmas.